Richard Spencer, the president of the National Policy Institute and a alt-right ideologue, spoke at a conference and sort of outlined the alt-right movement and their involvement with the Donald Trump presidency. Let's take a look at some of the videos about what they were speaking about this past Saturday.
The disgraceful things about the left is that they seem to want more Muslim immigration. They want that way more than they're worried about any downside and any concern to especially to women. Let's face it, there's these rape gangs and everything else, just Islamic law. Women really not having control of their lives. And so that, it's amazing that these leftists want this disease coming into our society, really, more than they want to protect themselves.
And my question is this. A lot of minority groups in this country, America's a multicultural country, are very, very afraid for their rights and security in the wake of a Trump election. And so I want to know exactly what are you calling for from a Trump administration for him to do with undocumented immigrant populations, children of undocumented immigrant populations, Muslim Americans right now who are terrified of being asked to put their name on a registry. What are you calling for him to do, and how is it remotely ethical or constitutional?
Loaded question. In terms of undocumented immigrants and their children, they've got to go home. And they can go home again. They can reconnect with their real identity, which is not 21st century America.
So those are just some clips that I pulled from this conference, but to give you a little bit more context about what they were talking about and what the conference was sort of outlining, America, he said, belonged to white people whom he called the children of the sun, a race of conquerors and creators who had been marginalized, but now in the era of President-elect Donald Trump were awakening to their own identity. Now, the reason why this is making headlines is because as he finished, several audience members had their arms outstretched in a Nazi salute. When Mr. Spencer, or perhaps another person standing near him at the front of the room, it was not clear who, shouted, "Heil the people, Heil victory," the room shouted back. And this is also after 11 hours of speeches and panel discussions, so this really dragged on. But what is the alt-right's connection to the Donald Trump presidency? So they actually did address this. Richard Spencer says, quote, "I do think we have a psychic connection, or can you say a deeper connection with Donald Trump in a way that we simply do not have with most Republicans. White identity," he said, "is at the core of both the alt-right movement and the Trump movement, even if most voters for Mr. Trump aren't willing to articulate it as such," which I thought was kind of an interesting point to end on, because it addresses what I know we've talked about before, is that a lot of people that voted for Donald Trump might not identify themselves as white supremacists. In fact, they would reject that sort of ideology. But here we are hearing from the head of the alt-right, Richard Spencer, the president of the National Policy Institute, that indeed, if you voted for Trump, you do have something in common with these people. Would you agree with that, Francis?
Yeah, I think so. It's not whether they want to acknowledge that they have something in common or not. They do. They both voted for a candidate that was endorsed by the KKK, that was endorsed by alt-right members of society that uphold values of white supremacy. That's just the way it works. That's it. Whether you believe or not that these are values that you hold true to you, and this is where I've been going back and forth with a lot of liberal friends of mine and those in other sources, where I say that I'm not going to paint everyone with the same brush, but rather than basically calling them this and saying you are racist, you are sexist, you are a xenophobe, I don't think we get anywhere, because we did it for 12 months and it gave us Donald Trump. So rather than that, now the only way I see sort of bridges being built is if I hold them accountable. So if you say this is not what you support, because the only way that this sort of change and any sort of middle ground comes to fruition is if they denounce this. This is not what we support, because I think it happens on the grassroots, like ground level. I think the change that we need to kind of be pushed forward, it's not going to happen from Donald Trump. He's not going to come out and denounce this. He'll maybe send it in a tweet at 3 a.m. Suddenly that's big enough. No, it's going to happen from those 46% of America is not this. I just cannot bring myself to believe that. So it's going to happen with those people that maybe have voted for whatever motive they believe. They need to stand against this and ensure that that's not something that they uphold as part of their party's values, because I think it's very easy to taint them all with the same brush and class them all as sexist and racists. Donald Trump voters, everyone else, and shame them. But I just don't agree that that's gotten us anywhere. I feel like that's gotten us Donald Trump. So rather than continue to do so, which again, it's valid in a lot of cases because there's a lot of people that are emboldened by Donald Trump and are uplifted and feel like they now resonate again. They don't. David Dukes of the world, those people are the scum of the earth. But to make sure that, to go around and say that everyone is them, I just don't think it gets us anywhere.
Well, what is the effect of the alt-right now going mainstream? Because this was a major conference that they were holding. People really are now giving the alt-right, Richard Spencer and his peers, the airtime that they didn't have before. They didn't have 12 months ago, because now people are realizing, journalists are realizing that they have a platform. Is that responsible journalism, though? I mean, should we be even listening to what they have to say? Is it just to report on it, you know?
We should be listening to what they have to say because we ought to be monitoring what they're saying.
I agree.
We ought to pay very close attention to what they have to say, and we ought to pay very close attention to how much of their ideology is implemented into a Trump administration. And when we consider that the chief policy advisor to Donald Trump is Steve Bannon, the editor-in-chief of Breitbart, which is the gospel publication, to the extent that something on the internet is published, of the alt-right, they have a voice in the White House.
Yeah.
I agree with Francis. We can't. I mean, I know Trump voters. In my extended family, they're not racist, right? And it wasn't their motivation. Their motivation was their Republican. First of all, you got to remember, a lot of Republicans just came home. It was the Republican nominee. They voted for the Republican nominee because that's what they do all the time. So there's some of that. Obviously, some of the economic populism, in a sense that the Democrats abandoned them, affected plenty of voters. Donald Trump, if he got creamed, was always going to get 53 million votes. He could have been humiliated, and 53 million Americans were going to vote for him no matter what. So, but there is a significant percentage that feels that, and it goes back to Fox News saying there's a war on Christmas, this notion that the alt-right has, that somehow, like he says it right here, you read it, Grace, children of the sun, a race of conquerors and creators who had been marginalized. How are white people in the United States of America been marginalized? In what possible way have white people, in what possible way is there a war on Christmas? What possible way for Laura Ingraham, who may be White House press secretary, when the cast of Hamilton criticized Mike Pence, and she responded by suggesting that what if Hillary had won and a white Christian had said they're afraid? The media would have been all, well, but white Christians aren't in danger. There is no threat. And, by the way, Hillary Clinton would have said, I hear your concerns. You have nothing to worry about. I'm president for everybody, right? But we ought to pay unbelievably close attention. And we also ought to remember that when we call them the alt-right, we are just merely accepting their rebrand.
Yeah. Right.
They're white supremacists in suits. And they all look like Lego figures.
And by the way, the other point is that you're right, is like, if Hillary Clinton won, they're still having this rally. They're having this to, how do we push forward? How do we continue to add voices? Like, they're going to have this no matter what. It's just there won't be as many cameras there because now they feel emboldened. Now they feel like their voice matters.
There was international media covering this conference.
Of course it is. And it's because everyone there's a lot of people that are worried, and rightfully so, because Donald Trump, whether his supporters want to believe it or not, he's invited them in. They are now, and this is the only comparison that I've made to a lot of Trump voters that I'm close with, is that, say, for instance, you decide to host a college party and you invite a bunch of people over, and people that you invite to your house commit atrocities. You might not believe what they're doing, but you invited them in, so it's your obligation to condemn that. It might not be what you believe if someone does something in your house, but if you invited them to that party, then you're responsible for what goes on in your house. So you need to, in a way, make sure that you push across that you're condemning this and this isn't what you voted and supported for. And to go back to what Ben said, I think that's one of the most valid points, and I've not heard it being stated enough, because again, it's valid. I'm not a person that's going to feel directly threatened by a Trump presidency. That's just, I have to state that out there. I'm an immigrant, yes, but I'm the type of immigrant that Donald Trump's not going to worry about. I'm white, and I have some sort of obligation to be here at the moment. And that's where it changes for a lot of people. But that being said, it's a lot easier to say that a lot of people are racist, sexist, this and this, when you got to think about what this country puts forward in terms of political values. You're either right or you're left. You're in the middle, you're going to get lost in translation. But you're raised, like, conservative values are so enriched with Christian values that you're raised in a certain way. So when it comes to some candidate that you've spent, in their view, 4 to 8 years looking at a president that they don't believe upholds their values, it's like a religion to them. So when it comes to the vote, it's like saying you have to switch from being Catholic to another form of religion. And some people, it's not as easy to do so, even if that candidate they're looking at is such a horrible candidate. They're not going to see it for what other people are going to see it, because they're so engraved in this tradition that has become American politics, because you guys don't have unbiased news sources. Everything they take is Fox or it's CNN.
Well, on television.
In television. I mean, yeah, we are, of course. Well,
we
so
do
let's say we're unbiased.
Well, there are.
But I try my best to be as logical as I can, because I came from a background of BBC, which is funded by a lot of corporations. I get it. But I love, in the UK, I really appreciate how a lot of the time we give news and we bring in correspondents that come in, share their views, but they're immediately categorized as they are a right-wing correspondent. They are a left-wing correspondent. Here, Fox News is seen as a true
Fair and
news
balanced.
source. This is what happened. They did it. And everyone's like, you're right, they did it. I can't argue back, they did it.
I think that examining the alt-right phenomena has been a little bit interesting for me in particular, because I am not in the base that they would appeal to at all. So I truly feel like I'm watching it as though I'm an alien, because I am a woman, and we didn't include any of these video clips, but I'd encourage you to look them up, about Richard Spencer talking about the role of women in the alt-right base and how they are reaching out to women and what they offer women. And a lot of what he said was motherhood. It just, that's the gift that women bring to the world, is that they can only be mothers, or not that they can only be mothers, but only women can be mothers, and how beautiful that is. And I was, just thinking about that, and I know that a lot of alt-right pundits or ideologues don't believe in lesbianism, which I do believe in it a lot. And so I'm watching this, and I'm hearing how separatist they are, and it's really strange for me to find that it is appealing to so many people that must feel, I guess, extremely cast out. That it's established this base is so strange to me, because it doesn't appeal to me at all in the least. But they really are cultivating this amazing phenomena that now we have to report on. But so much of what they are saying, I don't want to legitimize with coverage. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. It's hard to know exactly how to handle it. Because again, they're alt-right. They're white supremacists dressed up. That's their name, alt-right. I don't know whether you're much of a sports fan. I know Francis is, but part of why this works is that no matter what you are in sports, right, a way to motivate your team is to say, and we've seen it in every sport, college, professional, is to say, nobody believed in us, but we came together. The world was against us. Everybody thought we were losers, and look what we did. Even frequently when you're like, no, everybody, even when great teams do it, like Cavaliers, nobody believes in us. Everybody believed in you. What are you talking about? Literally. And so these guys, you need to feel victimized, and they have managed to turn that desire to be victimized into something that resonates with people. And that's how you get people in. People who wouldn't normally walk down the street and think, ugh, immigrant, right? But you think your life's not going well, you don't have a good job, you haven't gotten ahead, you're underachieving, your parents did better. Somebody tells you, man, the system's rigged against you. It's for the girls and the blacks and the immigrants, and it's not for you.
Right, and the gender roles, and also like where the race separatism. It's just the way that they are overtly preaching their message is something I feel is just absolutely.
They've been doing it.
They've been doing it, but the way that it's being covered and legitimized and validated in the mainstream media.
They've been emboldened. I mean, he said, Richard Spencer said this week, we may not be the establishment, but we should start acting like it now.
So here's the harsh reality, right? Is what you asked a great question, which is about you almost don't feel right covering it, right? Because you're almost giving more voice to it, and I understand that. But what we need to understand, Grace, is that for 12 months we ridiculed a lot of people who were kind of in limbo whether they were going to go Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, and those that kind of maybe showed some signs leaning towards Donald Trump, we labeled them as them. And what that does is that means that we focus nothing but our attention on the worst of that fan base and the worst of those followers, and started categorizing them in a way that they were immediately pushed towards Donald Trump. We did nothing but push them towards it. And we continued. Every news source was furthering looking at all the atrocities that were committed, which, by the way, a lot of them were merited. You have to look into how despicable some of these people are. But it wasn't all of them. And I felt that we just completely missed what our job was as people on the left, was to ask why. Like, you are leaning towards Donald Trump? Really? Why? Explain. And then I can use my educational tools and my ability to debate to try and sway you. But instead, we didn't. We lost the art of debating that, and instead, we focused all of our coverage on the extreme forms of Trump's protesters, the extreme forms of Trump's fans, So these people were given more of a voice. They were given a voice as soon as he announced his candidacy. And it only continued and grew further. And then when he came in to be president, Ben's right as well. We now need to actually pay attention because we need to keep our ear to the ground and make sure that they're not going to push anything even further. Like when you get Steve Bannon now going to be directly advising the president, and he's got his ear to the alt-right movement as well. We're not left with the choice. We need to actually listen in to see.
I would say we don't really need to keep our ear to the ground. They're yelling. I
No,
mean,
it's-
they are.
yeah, it's
you
no
can
longer
just
that.
poke your head outside and you'll hear them.
Yeah. So it's kind of that catch-22.
Yeah.
Real quick, just something to remember, people, and I love this stat, and I don't say it. You can interpret it any way you like.
Okay.
But it's interesting. If you, I read it in 538. So if you take one voter out of 100 in every state, one Trump voter, and turn them around, right? Convince them that it was Hillary. 1 out of 100 Trump voters in every state. Then you move the polls 2 points. She's going to win by 1.5. Then the poll would be 3.5. She'd have won, and the polls would have been right. And no, we would not be having any of these conversations. So, like, the margins are so unbelievably thin. If there is one benefit, and it's not worth it, of Trump winning, it's that we are at least having these conversations. To all the people who said lesser of two evils and who argued that Hillary loss will galvanize the left, I disagreed with them. I think it was a foolish, politically insane, inept, unthought out argument. Mm-hmm. But they are right about one thing, is that if she'd won, and it took so little for her to win, one person, you don't even have to do it in every state, but if you did it in every state, we'd get to that margin. That at least now we're talking about these guys, right? At least now we have a recognition. There is, as Jimmy Dore says, a face that we can point to, an evil face that we can point to and recognize. But I totally agree with you that we can't marginalize every Trump voter because plenty of them are good people who simply hated Hillary Clinton or didn't think or thought Democrats had completely sort of abandoned them economically.
Yeah, and it's most like a lot of the time when we report on these, it's almost like to a lot of people who maybe don't go and get their sources from many different subjects, they're thinking, oh my God, this is growing. All these people are joining together. They're all doing it. They've always been those type of people. They've always been there, but they now just feel emboldened. That's the way they feel that they can get away with it, yelling it in the streets, and they can get away with it doing these things.
Most importantly, they have a seat at the table, and that is alarming.
Podcast the whole 2-hour Young Turks every single day, commercial-free. All-Star Tuesdays, Aggressive Progressives, Old School, Post Games, TYT Classics. You get it all with membership. Do it now. TYTnetwork.com/join.